All right, let's get into it. Equalization, or EQ. I want to try and get through what it is, when we use it, and not a whole lot more. I like to say that EQ is a process. It's processor, but it's also a process of kind of sculpting the sounds in your mix by boosting or cutting certain frequencies. We'll get into what frequencies are. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make these instruments fit best. And we do that by accentuating the things that we like about a sound, bringing them out, but also cutting things that interfere with the clarity of a particular instrument. If we think about EQ as a graphic representation, it is an XY axis, and the X axis is frequency. And I think it's important for us to kind of go back one more time that frequency is measured in hertz and amplitude is measured in decibels. So frequency, again, going from the low frequencies like 80 up to, well, the human ear, 20 hertz to 20,000 or 20 kilohertz, and amplitude plus or minus. Very quickly, can we hear it? So here we have a basic EQ. I put it on the drum bus so that it's affecting the drum kit as a whole. And usually I ask the question if you ever play with bass and treble in the car on the stereo. And basically, your lows are your bass frequencies and your highs are your treble frequencies. So let's just boost the highs and see what we hear. So you hear that crispness, that brittleness. Certainly as we were getting up there, you heard more of the cymbals. We bring up the low end and we hear a lot more of the kick drum. Everything else becomes a little bit more clouded. But that in its essence is EQ. The human ear can hear between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz again until you get older and it starts to roll off, typically in the high end. Last time I got checked, I think I was hearing around 16 to 17 kilohertz. What is frequency? If you think about frequency as it relates to pitch, it's actually quite easy to understand, in my opinion. So sound is vibrations in the air, and frequency is how often those waves, those vibrations occur per second. So if we look at one of these things, as the wave goes up and then crosses the x-axis and back up, that's called a cycle. How many cycles are there per second determines the frequency. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. The lower the frequency, the lower the pitch. The higher the frequency, kind of like I demonstrated in the EQ, the brighter the sound, the lower the frequency, the warmer, perhaps we could say. It is really, really important as we think about the puzzle pieces that go into making a mix, that every sound covers a range of frequencies. It goes beyond or through different bands, and I'll kind of show you that real quick. But every instrument has a fundamental, a sweet spot that it resides in. And a lot of the other frequencies that are there are not key to its sound, and in fact are clouding the clarity of it, and perhaps even more importantly, clouding the clarity of neighboring sounds. For example, think of a kick and a bass, or even a guitar and a bass that may have some overlapping frequencies, but not in their fundamentals. So again, bands, I just want to kind of go over that really quickly. This EQ has 4 bands. The lows, the low mids, the high mids, and the highs. If you look at the EQ 7 band, this is a 7-band EQ, where you have, one is a filter. So a high pass filter, a low cut filter, a high pass filter, lows, low mids, mids, highs. So again, a kick drum is not going to only be in the lows. It's going to have some mid frequencies and even some high mids where the beater hits the drum head, for example. That's going to have a higher frequency fundamental. If you play a note, A4, or the open string of a guitar, that is 440 hertz. Fun fact. All right, so we talked about frequency and hertz. Amplitude, measured in decibels, is really just the loudness of that particular frequency. Is it, and again, a low-end instrument like a bass is going to have higher amplitude in certain ranges of frequencies, but that's what EQ is for. We can raise it, we can lower it, etc. Beyond amplitude and frequency that are so key, the third important parameter in a parametric EQ, and we're not going to really talk about types, is the bandwidth. How many additional frequencies are going to be affected when you make a move at a particular frequency? And that is called bandwidth. Very easy to demonstrate here. I'll use this EQ, although it's the same concept. If I grab this, actually I want to make sure that this is, if I grab this mid-range frequency and bring it all the way up, it has brought everything, even starting down under 50, up with it, and up above 5K and even 10K. If I come to the Q setting, so bandwidth and Q are often used, it is interchangeable, and I narrow that, I am taking far fewer neighboring frequencies along with it. This is much more precise, much more surgical. And again, this is adding EQ. This would be cutting those same frequencies. So bandwidth is really important for kind of determining really what focus point you are aiming for when you're using EQ. All right, so when do we EQ? We EQ all the time. Depends what it is that you're trying to do. So additive EQ is when you're adding amplitude to certain frequencies, and subtractive is when you're cutting. And really, the question is that, when are we adding, when are we cutting? We use additive EQ to accentuate something that we like, that we want to hear more of in our mix. And we use subtractive EQ to address things that we don't like. I think this is, let's see if I can do this quickly. Probably not. I'm always kind of just, so here's the kick in. And I'm going to make this the default again. And I'm going to grab the bass. And I can have both of these up if I press this button. Okay, and what I want to do is just look at these signals. I need to put the bass in. All right, so we see that they kind of share much of the same frequency range, but we can see kind of a fundamental in the bass, maybe at 80. So maybe what we would do is cut a little bit of 80 in the kick drum, not a lot because it's really important frequency as well. But with a EQ with more bands, we might even boost a little bit something underneath that, with the goal of creating more space for the bass. A very, very obvious one would be, say, with the guitar, where we might even cut so we see that there's some, information around 100, 200, but really the guitar is residing, between 350 and 3000. So we might put a high pass filter on in order to take anything that's down here and get rid of it, because this could interfere with the bass, especially if you have 5 tracks, for example. There's 2 guitars in here, there's a vocal, all of which are going to have some information down here, but it's not key to their ultimate sound. So cutting it out, because if you have 5 tracks of a bit of low-end information, as you add them up, it adds some muddiness and a lack of clarity. So again, we EQ almost everything. It's probably the most important thing outside of balancing volume and panning and creating space. EQ is really about helping to, again, sculpt each sound so that they fit best in the mix. And it very much is like a puzzle. It's something that takes a long time to train your ears in, because if you hear every EQ move, you may be overdoing it, but it is time well spent, and we're going to do a little exercise based on that now.